Hey everyone, Claire Sterling here. Ken Griffin is not building an office. He is building a monument to everything New York City refused to be. And when that tower opens, every mayor, every governor, every politician who told Wall Street to pay more and ask less will have to look up at it from the ground. Stay with me until the very end of this video, because the final piece of this story, the part that connects Miami, New York, Texas, and the entire future of American financial power, is something I have not seen a single outlet put together the way I am about to put it together for you right now. Let me start with what is visible, what is already happening in plain sight if you know where to look. At 1201 Brickell Bay Drive in Miami, Florida, a tower is going up, 54 stories, over 1,000 feet into the sky, 1.3 million square feet of office space, a 212-room luxury hotel built into the same structure, and a price tag that, according to reports I have been following closely, has surged to an estimated $2.5 billion. $2.5 billion for one building from one man, Ken Griffin, the founder and CEO of Citadel, one of the most powerful hedge funds on the face of this earth, managing somewhere in the range of $69 billion in assets. Now, I need you to stop for a second and feel the weight of that number, $2.5 billion. If you stacked $2.5 billion $1 bills flat on top of each other, that stack would reach past the cruising altitude of a commercial airplane. That is not a headquarters. That is not a corporate relocation. That is a statement carved in steel and glass, rising over Biscayne Bay, visible from miles away, impossible to ignore. And the statement it is making is directed at one place specifically, not Miami, not Florida, not the South, New York City. This tower is Ken Griffin's answer to New York City. And I think about what that answer means every single time I look at those construction plans. But here is where I need you to slow down with me. Because if you think this story started with a building permit in Miami, you are already 3 chapters behind. This story started the moment a certain kind of political logic took hold in the cities that used to be the undisputed homes of American capital. And to understand what Ken Griffin is building, truly understand it, not just the square footage and the hotel rooms, you have to understand what he left behind and why leaving by his own account was not hard. Let me take you back to what I would describe as the first act of this story. Ken Griffin built Citadel in Chicago, 30 years, 3 decades of anchoring one of the most iconic financial institutions in that city's history. Chicago shaped Citadel. Citadel shaped Chicago's identity as a financial center. The relationship ran so deep that it felt, to most observers, permanent. And then in June of 2022, Griffin announced Citadel was leaving, not restructuring, not opening a satellite office, leaving, picking up 30 years of history, and walking out the door. And when reporters pressed him on how difficult that decision must have been, how emotional it must be to leave a city you spent 3 decades building inside, his answer was 3 words: not hard, that is all, not hard. I remember reading that and feeling something shift in how I understood the way capital actually moves in this country. Because when a man who spent 30 years in a place describes leaving it as not hard, he is not being cold. He is being precise. He is telling you something specific about what that place had become. And what it had become, according to Griffin himself, was a city defined by 2 things above everything else: crime and taxes. Rising crime that made it difficult to attract and retain talented people, and a tax environment that had become, in his words, unsustainable. He called Chicago a failed city-state, not a struggling city, not a city with challenges, a failed city-state, and then he moved to Miami, and he never looked back. Now here is what I want you to hold in your mind as we move forward. That was Chicago. That was 2022. And the reason I am telling you this story right now in this video is that everything Ken Griffin described about Chicago, The crime, the taxes, the political climate, the feeling that the city's leadership had fundamentally failed. I am watching those exact same conditions take shape in New York City, right now, in real time. And this time, Griffin is not just watching from a distance. He is already positioned, he already left, and he is already building something permanent somewhere else. The question I cannot stop asking myself is this: did New York City's current leadership study what happened to Chicago? And if they studied it, did they actually believe it could happen to them? Let me tell you what the political landscape in New York looks like from where I sit, because the details here matter enormously. Mayor Zohran Mamdani took office on January 1st, 2026. He ran on one of the most unapologetically progressive platforms in modern New York City history, a 2% tax surcharge on every New York City resident earning more than $1 million per year, rent freezes for working-class tenants, a fundamental restructuring of how the city spends its money. And New York voters said yes. They elected him, he took office. And within hours of those election results coming in, based on what I was following across financial press at the time, the phones in hedge fund offices across Manhattan were ringing. The mood described by executives speaking to financial outlets was alarmed and depressed. Those were the actual words used: alarmed and depressed, not cautious, not concerned, alarmed and depressed. And the very next day, less than 24 hours after Mamdani won, Ken Griffin issued a public statement. One word in that statement landed like a grenade in every boardroom in America. The word was pray. Griffin said, and I want you to hear exactly what this means, coming from a man who controls $69 billion in assets. I pray that the policies Mamdani uses to govern and lead New York are different than the talking points he used to win the mayoral race. Pray, not hope, not expect, pray. When a man of that specific profile uses that specific word in a public statement directed at a sitting mayor, he is not offering a polite observation. He is issuing a warning, and the warning comes with a blueprint because he has already executed it once in Chicago, and it was not hard. This is where it gets dangerous. Because let me tell you what Mayor Mamdani inherited when he walked into City Hall. His own administration confirmed that the previous administration had left a budget gap of $12 billion spread across the next 2 fiscal years. $12 billion. That is not a budget problem. That is a budget crisis handed to a brand new mayor on day one. And here is the brutal irony that I keep turning over in my mind. Some of that gap was being closed, according to figures I was tracking, by Wall Street bonus tax revenues running stronger than anticipated, somewhere in the range of $2.4 billion more than projected in fiscal year 2026 alone, based on reports from the city's own financial disclosures. The mayor who came into office promising to tax Wall Street and regulate its power is also, at this very moment, desperately dependent on Wall Street's profits to keep his own city solvent. If those bonuses slow down, if the firms generating those bonuses begin to quietly reduce their New York footprint, the budget does not just get tighter, it collapses. And the people who feel that collapse first are never the people sitting in boardrooms. I will come back to that, because that is the part that I find genuinely unbearable about this entire story. But first, let me show you the other side of the ledger. Let me show you what is being built while New York debates tax surcharges. Because Ken Griffin's tower in Miami is not happening in a vacuum. It is happening inside a complete ecosystem that, from where I stand, looks less like a corporate relocation and more like the deliberate construction of an alternative financial capital. Miami now has a nickname that is being used seriously, not as a joke, not as marketing, Wall Street South. And that nickname is earned, because what has moved to Miami over the past several years is not just money. It is infrastructure. It is human capital. It is the specific density of talent and institution that historically took New York a century to build. Thousands of finance professionals have migrated from Manhattan to Brickell Avenue, Miami's emerging financial district. The energy there, from everything I have been tracking, is not the energy of a city receiving refugees from somewhere else. It is the energy of a city that believes it is becoming something entirely new. And Florida's value proposition to all of this is brutally, almost embarrassingly simple. Zero state income tax. If you earn $1 million in Florida, you keep $1 million before federal taxes. No state layer, none. Compare that to New York, where a top earner is already looking at a combined federal, state, and city tax burden approaching or exceeding 50% of every dollar earned, and that is before Mamdani's proposed 2% surcharge. After the surcharge, based on the math I have been running, that combined rate would push past 52%. At what point does that number stop being a policy and start being a farewell letter? Now, here is what nobody is talking about. And I mean nobody. Because while the political conversation in New York has been focused on the 2% millionaire surcharge, on rent freezes, on the $12 billion deficit, there is a deeper structural shift happening that makes all of those debates feel like arguments about deck chairs. I am talking about the Texas Stock Exchange. Federal regulators, according to reports I followed closely, approved the creation of an entirely new stock exchange backed by financial giants. And among the institutions involved in backing and supporting that exchange, based on what was being reported at the time, Citadel's name was appearing. At the same time, the New York Stock Exchange itself had already launched NYSE Texas, a fully electronic equities exchange based in Dallas that, by some counts I was tracking, already had well over 100 companies dual listed on it. Think about what that means for a moment. The physical and digital infrastructure of American financial markets, the stock exchanges, the trading platforms, the architecture that Wall Street was literally built on, that infrastructure is being quietly, deliberately, and I would argue permanently replicated in Texas. Dallas is building what some are calling Y'all Street. Miami is building a $2.5 billion Citadel skyscraper, and New York is raising taxes. I do not say that to be political. I say that because when I look at those three things side by side, I see a pattern. And the pattern is one I recognize because I have seen it before in Chicago, and Chicago thought it was permanent too. And this is the part that should scare you, because when I try to imagine what happens to New York City's budget if even a meaningful fraction of its financial sector quietly reduces its footprint, not a dramatic exodus, not a single announcement, just a slow, steady, undramatic reallocation of people and capital toward Miami and Dallas, the math becomes almost impossible to look at. Wall Street bonus taxes alone were helping close a multi-billion-dollar deficit gap. The New York State Comptroller's Office had reported an upward revision to city tax revenue running into the billions, driven almost entirely by financial sector performance. If that performance migrates, if the people generating those bonuses are filing taxes in Florida instead of New York, that revenue does not follow. It stays in Florida. It stays in Texas. And New York is left holding a structural gap that cannot be closed by taxing the people who remain, because the people who remain are, by definition, the ones who could not afford to leave. Now this gets darker, because I want to talk about what actually happens at street level when a city loses its financial core. Not to hedge fund managers, not to billionaires. They are already fine. They are sitting by pools in Miami, paying zero state income tax and watching their new headquarters rise floor by floor over Biscayne Bay. I want to talk about what happens to everyone else. Think about the dry cleaning shop in Midtown Manhattan that spent 30 years serving Wall Street professionals. Think about what happens to that business when the offices it depended on go dark. Think about the coffee cart that stood on the same corner for 20 years, built around the foot traffic of finance workers arriving before 8 in the morning. Think about the Pakistani restaurant near the financial district that was packed with traders every single lunch hour. Think about the taxi driver who spent his days doing airport runs for executives whose companies no longer have a New York presence. In the last several years, based on data I have been tracking, more than 4,000 restaurants permanently shut down in Manhattan alone. 4,000 restaurants, each employed on average 15 to 20 people. The math there is somewhere between 60 and 80,000 jobs. Not finance jobs, not tech jobs, waiter jobs, chef jobs, dishwasher jobs, manager jobs, working class jobs, gone. And the people who held those jobs did not move to Miami. They did not move to Texas. They are still in New York, still paying rent, still trying to survive inside a city whose economic foundation is being quietly hollowed out while the political class debates surcharges on people who have already started calling real estate agents in Palm Beach. I keep coming back to something I find almost impossible to communicate without sounding alarmist, and yet I feel I have to say it because the data keeps pulling me back to the same place. There is a concept that economists use to describe what I believe is already unfolding in New York. They call it the urban doom loop, and the name alone should tell you everything you need to know. High taxes and deteriorating governance push wealthy residents and businesses out of the city. When they leave, tax revenue drops sharply because a disproportionate share of city tax comes from top earners. With less revenue, the city cuts its budget. Budget cuts mean fewer services, reduced infrastructure investment, diminished quality of life. When quality of life declines, the middle class, the people who have options but are not necessarily rich, starts to leave. When the middle class leaves, local businesses lose their customer base. Those businesses close, the tax base shrinks further, the city cuts more. More people leave. Round and round, every rotation worse than the last, until the city hits a floor that may take decades to recover from, if it recovers at all. Chicago has not fully recovered from the companies it lost, and Chicago lost Citadel, Caterpillar, and Boeing inside the same decade. New York has not lost any of those names yet. But the conditions that preceded Chicago's exodus, I find it genuinely difficult to look at the current New York political environment and not see those exact conditions taking shape in real time. Here is the billion-dollar question, and I mean that literally, except the actual number is orders of magnitude larger. What does it cost New York City if Wall Street leaves? Not all of it, not dramatically, just quietly. Just gradually, just enough that the tax revenues start to slide, the office buildings stay darker, the restaurants keep closing, and the budget gaps keep widening faster than any surcharge can fill them. Bloomberg analysis, based on figures I have tracked, suggested New York was losing something in the range of $14 billion per year just from high-income residents choosing to base themselves elsewhere. $14 billion every year gone, not disappearing, landing somewhere specific, landing in Florida, landing in Texas, landing in the states that said yes when New York was saying pay more. And here's the thing about capital that no political poster will ever tell you and no campaign rally will ever acknowledge. Capital does not have loyalty. Capital has math. And when the math says Miami, capital goes to Miami. When the math says Texas, capital goes to Texas. That is not evil. That is not greed. That is just how every single entity, from a family choosing where to raise their children to a $69 billion hedge fund choosing where to build its permanent home, has always and will always make decisions. And the political class that refuses to accept this is not standing on principle. They are standing in the path of a current that moves regardless of whether they acknowledge it. Let me show you where I think this goes. And I want to be precise about this because I am not in the business of catastrophizing. I am in the business of pattern recognition. And the pattern I am seeing right now when I layer New York's current political direction on top of what happened in Chicago, on top of what is being built in Miami, on top of what is being constructed in Texas, The pattern suggests that something structural, something potentially permanent, is shifting in American financial geography. For a century, New York City was the answer to the question of where financial power lives. That was not an accident. It was the result of infrastructure, of talent density, of regulatory frameworks, of network effects built over generations. Those things do not disappear overnight. New York still has extraordinary fundamentals, world-class universities, the deepest talent pool on the continent, cultural capital that took over 100 years to build. But the conditions that preserve those fundamentals, the ability to attract and retain the firms and individuals who activate all of that potential, those conditions are, from where I stand, looking increasingly fragile. And a $2.5 billion tower going up on Brickell Bay Drive in Miami is not just a building, it is evidence. It is Ken Griffin saying with every floor that rises that he made a calculation about where the future of American financial power is headed. And he made that calculation not with emotion, not with ideology, with math. And with the memory of doing this exact thing once before in Chicago and finding it not hard. I do not know exactly how this resolves. I do not think anyone does. What I do know, what I feel with a certainty that comes from watching these patterns for a long time, is that the decisions being made in New York City right now in 2026 are not minor policy adjustments. They are inflection points. They are the kind of decisions that 10 years from now, historians will look back at and identify as the moment the trajectory either stabilized or accelerated towards something much harder to reverse. Chicago made its decisions, then Citadel left, then Caterpillar left, then Boeing left, and Chicago is still, years later, working through the consequences of that sequence. New York has not hit that sequence yet. But I look at that tower going up in Miami, I look at the exchanges being built in Texas, I look at the luxury real estate inquiries spiking in Palm Beach and Brickell, and I feel, not as an analyst, but as someone who has spent years watching the way systems break before anyone in power admits they are breaking, I feel the early vibration of something that has happened before, in a different city, with a different cast of characters, and the same underlying logic, the same math, the same answer, and that answer this time is 54 stories tall, rising over Biscayne Bay, with Ken Griffin's name on the door. Whether New York is watching, really watching, not just reacting, is the question I cannot answer. What I can tell you is this: the building is not waiting for an answer. It is already going up, floor by floor, while the debate in New York continues. And somewhere in Miami, the view from the top is getting clearer every single day.